Tell us the story about the first time that you watched porn, or one of the first times that you remember of watching porn, and how were you introduced to it?
These are the videos I had already downloaded. My old man, who was an absolute drunk, he was like a porn addict.
That kind of set a stage of just seeing all sex as bad.
Like, what is the correlation between porn and sex trafficking? I used to go to the bathroom and masturbate to calm down.
Did you know that they're actually having sex in porn?
Has anybody gotten caught?
Far more times than I'd like to talk about.
Like anything that's wrong with this world, like the internet is not to blame.
You know, like I wish my younger self knew that wasn't real.
Big misconception about addiction is that people think it's a place that you go to feel high. Really, it's a place you go to feel nothing.
Gentlemen, welcome to Question the Rules. You all ready to talk about porn?
Born ready.
Yeah.
Studying all last night.
It's not even noon. What else are we going to talk about? Right?
It's like, what are you doing on a Saturday morning at 11 o'clock? Oh, we're going to talk about porn.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to have you all here. Thanks so much for being here. I could tell that, just before we got on the set to sit down and have this conversation, that this was going to be really something for many reasons. But why don't we just start off with an easy question? Tell us the story about the first time that you watched porn, or one of the first times that you remember of watching porn, and how were you introduced to it?
My old man, who was an absolute drunk, he was like a porn addict. And I remember going to the video store and they had the back room, and he would always go into the back room and come out with the blue tapes. They had the blue cases. And he was his brain was so wet. He was just an absolute dunce. He had dropped out of school at 8th grade. And he had wired the TV in my room somehow to receive the same signal as the TV that he watched the porn on. And so I remember playing Atari, and then normally I'd shut the TV off and then shut the video game off. But this one time I shut the video game off and there was just fucking on the TV. And I was like,
Better than Atari.
What is happening? How old were you?
I think I was probably like 11 or 12. And it was like, I changed the channel. I was like, it's normally like cheese or snow. And it was just every channel was this fucking. And then I went and opened the door, and there's the drunk old man watching the same thing. And I was like, oh, this guy's a fucking idiot. He wired both of them together. So, there was a lot of learning after that. I wouldn't jerk off to it because I was like, I'm not going to simultaneously jerk off with my dad.
Yeah.
But it really fucked me up.
Yeah.
For the first bunch of years.
That's intense. So how did you start to heal through that?
It's a long process, and probably for another show. But aside from his alcoholism, he was very violent, And so I was out of the house by 15. I've been on my own since 15. I just took off, and I've been just running around for the past, from 15 to about 30, trying to figure out my ass from my elbow, and bouncing off the walls and making a lot of mistakes. And not until I eventually found my wife, and she's like, all right, you're not this fucked up. You have to reel it in. And so I feel like my life started around age 30 and meeting my wife and her like holding my hand through the rest of it and getting me back on track. Because the first 30 years were absolutely fucked.
Gentlemen?
First time with porn?
Yeah.
Actually, one of my first times was finding my uncle's porn stash. He had VHS tapes. And I remember the process of figuring out when the parents were gonna be home. It was me and my brother, and we'd be like, okay, we gotta figure this out. We have to watch these tapes. We have to see what's on these. We knew that it was something inappropriate by the titles. And we would basically act like we're sick before church on Sunday. Just to stay home and be like, no, we're both really, really sick. And then we'd find the tapes and make sure all the doors are locked and put it on and just be like, holy shit, this is amazing. And yeah, we just, my uncle moved out, we stole one of his tapes, and I think he was ashamed of having porn because, the family and stuff, so he never told anyone, and we held onto that tape for so long, and it came with us like to so many places until we finally got dial-up internet.
What was the first porn? What was in it?
I mean, it was bushy for sure. There was a lot of
Define
bush.
bushy.
It was just like a lot of, I think it was like 70s porn. It was like,
Okay.
he definitely had like older porn stuff, but it was, traditional, normal, man-female type stuff. And yeah, I just remember feeling like that process of getting to the point where you can watch it and like having to plan and plot and like figure all the things out was actually a little bit more exciting than the porn itself. But yeah.
Interesting. We'll get to that in a sec.
I remember going over to a buddy's house for a sleepover, and he had just gotten back from summer camp and had this book that was just filled with tear-outs that he'd gotten from the older campers and things like that. And we would like fight over who was gonna get which photo or which half of a magazine to look at that sleepover. And then like, it couldn't have been more than like 3 or 4 sleepovers into this routine that we had going that like high-speed internet became a thing. And I remember him just being like, these are the videos I have already downloaded, and then leaving me to this Shangri-La of porn and shit that like I didn't know was fucking possible. I didn't like the stuff that I was like, no idea that like things could go into those places. And
I like that he
people
was
said
like
shit
ushering
that.
you in.
Yeah, it was like an orientation into this world. So I had that, and I had ushers my way, and that was pretty much my
Like the
sex education.
curated porn
curated
selection.
experience,
Left
yeah.
for you by the friend, like, here you go.
Yeah, and I would like
These are approved.
I was like, this isn't a big enough collection, so I would type in things and start downloading stuff on his computer. Come back like a week later when it had finished, because high speed wasn't that high speed.
Right. It was
Like,
like 1 kilobyte a second.
Yeah.
And you're like, come on.
exactly. And like half of them were viruses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it
we
was
didn't
just
care.
like garbage.
It was a worthwhile risk.
So what was your experience? Like, what did it feel like to watch porn for the first time?
I mean, I understand it now as being high as a kite. Just like, really felt like there was this world that I had not seen that I now had unfettered access to. Like I had been given the keys to the fucking Lamborghini. And like this was it, and there were no rules. There were no rules. Like I could legit find anything I wanted. And I was like, oh, I guess this is how the world works. And like trying to regulate what I thought was wrong with what I was seeing, and like the guys on screen getting the reward that I wanted. And so it was super confusing, right? And super exciting.
Yeah.
Had no idea what was what, had no idea what actually felt good, what would work, what was fake. And also knowing that I fucking loved it.
Yeah. And
like it was great.
Outside of like that one buddy, did
Yeah.
you talk to anybody else about like porn or about like, what you were downloading?
Not in any way that like you would think of as constructive.
Yeah.
Like this became a thing. Like our whole crew like would have sleepovers, and this would happen, and we figured out which channels started like playing the porn after certain hours, and like we knew whose buddies' houses had Cinemax, because Cinemax had porn, and like those were the best houses to have sleepovers at. And but outside of like strategizing over when we were gonna get our next hit, there was no like, hey man, how did that make you feel?
It's like no sitting down and
or like, do you
questioning,
think
like,
that that's really how this works? Like, we never had those conversations.
Yeah, I don't think any of those conversations have really come up early on. Like, you're kind of just experiencing it for the first time and just excited about having access to it.
Yeah.
But confused as fuck.
Yeah, just like fully in it.
But it was the exact same conversations we would have about like getting beer or cigarettes or weed or things like. It was the exact same. Like same way you would tell like war stories. Like, man, I was so high on like Sam's roof last night. Like same shit. Like, oh, I watched this great video last night. Like you gotta like same concept.
So what were your routines or rituals? Like as you sort of got into porn, maybe you started dating, you're like in
porn
high
ritual.
school, because I think people have a ritual, right?
Totally.
Like I know I like on Reddit, I'll see like the internet meme, somebody will have created a meme and it's like parents are out and it's like a dude holding like a Vaseline bottle and like a box of Kleenex, right? And it's like, okay, people clearly like, guys, we have our rituals when it comes to watching porn. So what did that look like for you? When did you find yourself watching it?
I never really had a ritual. It was really utilitarian to just get it done, move on with my day. I've always sort of been, a Johnny Cash fan. Don't take your guns to town. So like if I was going to go to the party, like just get this done, and then I could just focus on conversation and not hormones surging through my body. So I didn't really have a ritual, but I will admit to this, again, haven't told anyone this one, but I'm terrified of flying. And so I guess my one actual masturbation ritual is when I sit down in my airplane seat, I put all the things, and then I used to go to the bathroom and masturbate to calm down because I would be terrified. And then someone's like, you could just take drugs. And I was like, masturbation drugs? And they're like, no, like anxiety drugs. And so I did that, and then I stopped jerking off on airplanes.
So it almost sounds like porn or masturbation served a function of like helping to calm you in like anxious times.
Yeah, I mean, even to this day, it's it's soothing. Like when stressed out. I think that's for anyone though, right? Like it's exciting. It's both exciting, but it's also soothing.
Yeah.
It can be like the tryptophan in turkey. On Thanksgiving, you're just like, the world doesn't exist beyond this turkey.
Yeah. What about you guys?
I mean, I think like initially when you just had access to it and we're first getting access to it, it was very like whenever you can, like find time to be alone with it. But then like as soon as I kind of lived alone, I just remember setting up like entire days where I would just like watch porn all day and see how many times can I jerk off, because that seemed like something fun to do.
Marathon.
Yeah, it's like 14 times in a day and be like, okay, let's not do that for a week.
Skin goes back.
Yeah.
Where's
mostly
Daniel?
because it,
He's been gone for
move around.
been gone all weekend.
Yeah.
Just like all calloused and a mess. But yeah, I remember like setting up those as like very special days, and it was just like very like, okay, this is gonna be my me time. This is like my self-care. Just go and masturbate all day. But I don't do that anymore. Now there's partners and stuff. We'll watch porn together. But yeah, I always remember that. And I think, once I started incorporating porn into my relationships, where like I would be with, either my wife or at the time, or like, partners and stuff, it became like more natural to like enjoy porn and discover new porn and kind of make it part of the sexual experience, which was always nice because it didn't feel as shameful. Like I grew up very, very religious, so masturbation was completely off the table. We weren't even supposed to like, get erect. So you always had this shame that was associated with porn. And I think once it got incorporated into my relationships and didn't feel like something I was hiding from a partner or hiding from someone, it became very like natural to be accepting of that, relationship.
Yeah. Interesting. What about you, Mike?
I think I had less of a ritual than I had skills. Like I really
Define that. What do you
I've developed some skills in order to
Special
get.
set of skills.
I have a very particular set of skills.
Like knocking it off the backboard
Yeah.
into the garbage can.
Exactly.
like skills so that you could watch porn?
So that I could watch porn in a way that felt good for me. So
Yeah.
like everything from learning how to masturbate left-handed, right? So that I could use a
switch
computer.
hitter.
The stranger.
Yeah, the stranger.
Beware the stranger.
Beware the stranger.
You have to sit on your hand and get it numb first. That's the stranger.
That never worked out for me well.
It really doesn't work.
well, yeah.
It's like it's a ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's
no.
a ridiculous
It's
lie.
not enjoyable for anybody.
Yeah, now my hand's
your hand
dead,
hurts.
Like,
I've been here for too long already. Learning how to masturbate left-handed so that I could use a computer, to learning like the keyboard tricks that would hide things. Because like keep in mind, I'm like 11 or 12 with full access to high-speed porn, meaning I'm probably in a house with my parents or somebody else's parents, or I'm in college with a roommate, not like a roommate who lives on the other side of a wall, like a roommate who sleeps in the same room as me. Figuring out ways that I could do this like as covertly as possible, so that like I could easily switch back to my whatever essay I was supposed to be writing or music I'm supposed to be listening to. But yeah, I think the ritual, to whatever extent, depending on where I was, like figuring out how I could get alone, or knowing what the sounds in the apartment were that meant that like people were coming or not.
Woodboards creak. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Like I had a fucking spidey sense.
Mine was like the stairs. Like I was downstairs in the basement, and my parents, for whatever reason, I'm sure they're gonna watch this and get a good kick out of this. For whatever reason, when they first got the computer, they put it downstairs, and like not thinking like we have a like a 13-year-old boy downstairs who's going to be using this computer. And so like I think a huge part of my ritual was like every night when everybody had, I thought, gone to bed.
Right.
That was like the prime time, right? And so it's like very cautious of like hearing people coming down the stairs.
Totally.
Of just like the spidey senses, you know?
Did you ever get caught? Has anyone gotten caught?
Far more times than I'd like to talk about.
All right, well, share one. Share one.
Oh, share one. The worst. The worst. Only because it was the only person who ever actually said anything. Which maybe the ones who don't say anything were worse. I don't know, because then I have to live with that fucking shame internalized. I remember in college, this was freshman year, my desk faced the door to the hallway, right? And which was great if my roommate was in the room, because I could watch whatever and he would have no visual of my screen. But if, heaven forbid, the door was not locked, someone had full access to whatever I had full access to. And I remember like a marathon session, because like I wasn't actually going to college. I was using the fucking great internet provided by the University of Michigan to my dorm. And like, I guess in the middle of the session, getting up to go to the bathroom and leaving the door open like an idiot, and leaving despite all my skills that I've just bragged about, leaving the porn up on the screen. And of course, at this time, like I was into like taboo shit, because I'd been watching porn for 5 years, and having that up on the screen and coming back and finding one of the hallmates just like jaw dropped, trying to figure out.
What were you
and
watching?
be like, God, I don't even remember. I wish I did, but like he was just like, so that's
what you're doing.
interesting, and like the fear that shook me, like everyone's gonna know that I was watching like whatever weird shit I was into, and having to like alpha up all of a sudden and be like, what, like you don't? Like you're not watching this too? And get all like alpha in the hallway to like make sure he stayed quiet.
Yeah.
That was a strange mix of emotions in a 5-minute period.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I think my conversation was like my parents had found my browser history.
Oh God.
And I had forgotten to, I think I was like 14 or 15, and I had watched like hours of porn. Like I had just sat there and watched hours. So like, you know, when you sit there and watch hours of porn, over time you just go through, like you get into some weird shit. You get in some weird shit, you find yourself in some places that you probably never want to go back to, and there's regrets, you know, regrets are ahead. And I remember my parents like sitting me down, and I'm on the couch and they're across from me, and they're like,
You mean like this?
look. So yeah, kind of like this, yeah. And so my mom is just sitting there and she's like totally quiet and silent, and she doesn't know what to say. And my stepdad starts having this conversation, and he had printed off the fucking browser history.
Let's review what you've been watching.
Fucking clipboard.
Printed off the browser history, and I was like,
concerning ones.
I was like, you son of a bitch, like how could you do that? And like we didn't go through it, but he very clear was like, so I printed off your browser history, and we need to have a conversation, you know. And we started to talk about how I'd been watching porn and why, and it was just so interesting, because like what an awkward, embarrassing conversation. But we hadn't really talked about sex that much before, you know. And so to kind of get busted like that, it didn't stop me, right? I still kept doing it, but I was just much more sleuth about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's surprising that a lot of people have that, like those sex conversations when something wrong happens. Like it's very rare to like discuss that and talk with your kids about porn and explain to them like these are actors and this is all fake and this is all fantasy and this is something that you should know. Like more of those conversations are happening now, but back then I think as porn was becoming so available, there was like that fear of having those talks. So most people's association with porn and being discovered to watching porn was always focused on shame. It was always focused on the bad and like the mistakes that you made. And I think that didn't help a lot of people.
Yeah, and
develop.
you know, you mentioned religion before, which, you know, I think you yourself and myself, and I don't know about you, Mike, but that seemed to like really shape the narrative and the conversation, the messages around sex growing up. So like, can you give some background into what that was like and what the messages were?
Yeah, I mean, I was raised Jehovah's Witness. We were third generation, so my grandmother was actually in it. My mother was fully raised in it. My father as well. And I mean, just the relationship with sex in general is very much no sex before marriage. But even kissing or being alone with a girl or masturbating, anything that can trigger sexual thoughts was extremely bad. And you'd have to like talk to elders and you have to talk to people about any sort of desires and stuff that you were having. So that kind of set a stage of just seeing all sex as bad. So like once porn came into the picture and once a lot more porn became available because of high-speed internet and just having this kind of unlimited stream of just naughty things, it kind of it triggers like you kind of like want to push away from that. You want to push away from the stuff that you've been taught, and it's like that gateway drug into like what is sex, and it's the only thing that you have explaining to you about sex. Like my parents were the types that didn't want me to have sex education in school, so there was no conversations whatsoever, and they completely didn't talk about it. It's actually funny. My mom one day came to the kitchen table, like when we were older, maybe a couple of years ago, and she just seemed like very shocked and like for surprise, and we're like, oh, what's wrong? And she comes to me and my two brothers and my dad, and she's just like, did you know that they're actually having sex in porn? And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, I thought they were actors. I thought they were like acting, but there's like, they actually have sex. And she didn't even realize the concept of like what porn was, which made her so much more upset for all the things we did as kids. Because she was just like, this is real. They're really having sex. It was just that shock and that surprise. And we all like kind of laughed and like, just realized how blocked off people can be from like what's really happening in the world and what's out there and how that kind of leads their entire life, to be sheltered, to be, in a space in your own little bubble so you don't have to know, and you don't want to accept that. So I don't know, that's kind of like shaped a lot of my relationships with sex early on, where it's just like, I don't know, it just builds curiosity.
Yeah, how would you say that shaped the work that you do today? Because you've kind of gone straight into like this not safe for work and teaching sex and liberation and sexuality. So how would you say that the sort of confines of the structure that you grew up in, how did that shape you?
I mean, a lot of NSFW and what our goal is to ask what people would be like if they didn't have shame. If people were not loaded on with all this guilt and all this kind of judgment, whether it comes from a God in the sky or it comes from the people in their religions or the people in their family. What happens if we get a good enough amount of people to just not accept shame in their life and not to be ashamed of these things? And I think a lot of that was shaped by my upbringing and being in a religion that's so restrictive. And it's strange. It's like it's the type of place, like even with my parents now, like we really can't have conversations. Like it's very difficult, our relationship. And they were taught, that once you kind of leave, like you're not supposed to talk to your kids. You're supposed to like completely cut yourself off from people. And like just learning that and training that, it really does shape a lot of the things. Like it just adds that curiosity. Like we take everything that you see in porn and teach you how to do it. So from, kink to BDSM to like, anything really. It's a lesson in how to get there, so that the stuff that you're seeing, the stuff that turns you on, is stuff that you have access to.
Yeah, and I would imagine that curiosity that it sounds like you had as a kid, being in that restrictive space, wanted, kind of made you want to like go outside of that box and start to like learn about it. Like, how did you start to learn about sex? Was it through porn? Was it through experimenting? Was it a mix of both?
I mean, I grew up and I kind of always knew I was bisexual. Like I always had that feeling for both. So once I left my house around 17, I just went to sex parties a lot. Like literally anything. I was one of those like Craigslist people who were just like, what's going on and what's happening? And go to like the scary hotel things and then the scary BDSM clubs and like, the weird swinger couple stuff, which gets, interesting. So I think before I was married, I got married at like 25. I had been to maybe like 30 to 40 different sex parties and events and stuff like that from the full spectrum of sexuality, and just realized that there was a lot missing. There wasn't conversations about consent. There wasn't, safe environments where people can explore. There was no education at all about teaching people about sex. It was kind of just like this very, just cum dumps. Like you just go to the cum, and then you leave. So a lot of that shaped my decisions to like build NSFW and to create more of a community and create a place where people can, feel comfortable about this stuff and talk about it. And I think that's why we've been so successful. Like it's just grown rapidly, which is great.
Yeah, and I think a lot more people now are starting to have these types of conversations and like opening up the box, opening up the conversation, and really starting to question, like, was that healthy? Like when I would sit there and masturbate for like a whole day or like 5 hours, like whatever, is like, and was watching porn, like, was that healthy? It's like, no, not really. That was a pretty unhealthy space, right? And I mean, maybe for some people it was a liberating space, it was an educating space, but now people are starting to have those different conversations. So what about you guys? How did like religious messages around sex shape maybe the way that you dated or the way that you went and interacted with porn?
Well, it's strange for me because my family is Portuguese, and it's a very sexually repressed country. They've got Our Lady of Fatima appeared to 3 children, and there's holy ground everywhere. But then there's this tiny little town called Caldas da Rainha, and in every one of their gift shops, their main export are porcelain penises of every shape and size. They have statues of Jesus with a string, and you pull it, and the dick pops out. They've got every main occupation: a policeman, a fireman, a nurse. You pull the string, a dick pops out, and they're painted like peach colored with fire engine red tips and balls. And I remember being a kid and seeing this and being like, what the fuck? Like, we'd go into this town and it'd be blocks of goat cheese and dicks.
It's interesting to see how, I mean, for a lot of people, the sort of rules of some religions can sometimes shape how they interact with sex, and they'll shape how they interact with porn.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about off camera, we talked about, the fetishes that can sometimes be seen in porn, right? And some of them are specifically around trying to heal through shame, and heal through some of the maybe trauma that's been there. But, a lot of the research is also showing, that's coming out, that a lot of porn is being created to actually eroticize trauma and actually eroticize abuse and abandonment. And so I'm curious to get your take on that as we sort of maybe look at the porn industry itself. Like, what are the rules that you think that men have to follow that lead them to porn? Because I think for me personally, when I look at like the rules of men, oftentimes like the big one is like, we're performance objects, right? Like, we take pride in performing and achieving. And I think when I look back at my personal usage of porn, a big part of it was like, how do I learn how to just be a bedroom champion? Like, how do I learn how to fuck, basically? And when I would watch porn, it was like, oh, I'm gonna try and get this education so that I can perform for sex, for women. And that was really interesting because that shaped my usage of porn. And then it shaped how I interacted sexually with people. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are the rules of men that you feel informed your porn usage?
Yeah, I think that's a really, it's a really good point, especially coming off what you guys just shared about growing up, because I was raised in a totally different environment from both of you. Like, sex was not repressed in my culture, in like my house, but like it also was not talked about. I wasn't religious. I didn't go to religious school. I went to a real progressive private school where we had sex ed and assemblies where people talked about some of this stuff, but it was never put in the context of actual young adulthood, especially for me as a young man, and thinking about what you were just sharing. It's like, all right, I was being bullied, right? And my understanding, especially for the teasing that was happening around the way I looked, it's like, all right, if I can pull the hottest girl in school and make her think that I am like Superman in the bedroom, then no one would be able to say shit to me about how I looked. Because like, who's the ultimate barometer, who's the ultimate judge of this would have to be the hottest girl in school. And so porn was like research at the start, at least that's what I thought. And then of course later, as you were talking about, it ends up just becoming like a soothing thing. But yeah, it was absolutely research to try to figure out, because like, sure, people were talking about what, sex was, but no one was saying how. No one was saying how to get what I actually wanted, right? People were just telling me what it is in a very narrow and very kind of prissy language, like that often was shrouded in things like, despite the progressive nature of my environment, was shrouded in things like fear and shame, because they're just like words that people don't want to say. There are actions people don't want to talk about. It's just like, yeah, everybody loves everybody. Like, it's gonna be great. Like, you're gonna know. I was like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. No matter how many people told me you were just gonna know. Like, I didn't know shit.
Yeah.
So I went online. You know, I took it into my own hands. No pun intended.
It almost sounds like porn helps to break a bunch of rules that are producing shame and like helping people hide, but it also seems to reinforce other rules. So
Sure.
So which rules do you think porn helps to break, and which ones do you think that they help to reinforce?
I think right now is a great period in porn. I think in the past, you know, it was this male-dominated thing. Even in the industry, it was like, you know, it was pretty greasy. You know, like the term casting couch is a thing for a reason, because that's the road that women had to go to. And it's finally at a point where people are realizing, like, they are the stars. Like, none of this happens without these women. And so I've interviewed a bunch of porn stars over the years, and like women like Joanna Angel, who she owns her own company, Burning Angel. She was like one of the first to really own her own thing, top to bottom. And she's crushing it, and she's inspired a bunch of other women to start their own thing.
What would you say is the behind the scenes? Because I think, you know, as a porn user, I don't think that most porn users really know much about the behind the scenes. So over the last decade or so that you have sort of all been involved with the porn industry in some way, what is the behind the scenes look like?
I mean, the industry has changed so much. I think there's a lot more power in the hands of the creators.
Okay.
You know, you have a lot more of the stars, you know, taking ownership of what they do. You have sites like OnlyFans. You have sites that are out there that let them monetize and make their own porn. So they're shooting stuff while they're on vacation. They're shooting content that feels like high quality, like YouTube, you know, traveler type content, the type of stuff that this younger or millennial generation is kind of attracted to. And because of that, you have more female creators in porn. So I think before it was very male dominated, the ideas and the thoughts were very male focused, but now, you know, kink.com, you know, has a female CEO. You know, like it's like the women are kind of taking control of the industry in a lot of ways. And we're seeing more representation in porn. We're seeing more of the content that just didn't exist before. And you're seeing more porn that has conversations about consent and the idea that, you know, this person's here and they're excited to be here and they're excited about what's going to happen. And, you know, being able to showcase that wasn't something that, you know, even existed 10 years ago. There was no kind of idea of that. Also, I think just with the amount of free porn that's out there, the studios are getting a lot more creative on what they create and what they build out. So you're seeing porn that has, you know, production budgets like reality TV shows where it's multiple stars and it's scripted and it's like a real production to it. And a lot more studios are going that way of like really creating this higher quality content. And I think with that, you're seeing more female voices. You're seeing more of that perspective. And I think that's just helping everyone. You know, it's really helping get out of the dirty, mucky period of porn where it was more about objectification. It was more about, you know, the female as a subservient and the male gaze and that kind of feeling. And now it's gone to, there's so many voices. There's so many things you can find. There's so many options that if you're looking for it and you want it, you'll find it. And women especially are now becoming the highest, just the highest level of where all the new business is coming from.
Why is that, would you say?
Because they're creating porn for women. They're creating porn that actually is attractive to them and interesting to them. It's not, you know, where the men are attractive. You know, like there was a long time where, you know, you had Ron Jeremy and those types of porn personalities where it's like, well, we never have to show their face, so it doesn't matter. Now it's like the men are much more attractive and it's much more, you know, now it's like yoga porn. You know, it's like it's very much becoming like the female-directed, you know, narrative. And I think that's just attracting a lot more women to it.
Yeah.
And I think it's been neat for the past, you know, 15, 20 years that it's one of the few industries that I can think of where the female actress makes double to triple what the male counterpart does. I think they deserve far more for the work that they do, but because there's a lot of social ramifications that come with signing on to that. You know, I've got a bunch of friends that are parents that do porn. And they're lovely people. It's like in People Magazine, they're just like us. You know, they're just normal folk, and they are great parents, and they care a lot about their children. And some of the best parenting advice I've gotten has come from porn moms. But, you know, they've also told me stories that their 8-year-old was the only child not invited to a birthday party in the class. Yeah. Like, you're good enough to jerk off to me, but I'm not good enough to eat your slice of shitty pizza.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think there's a certain connotation for people that are in the industry for sure. I also think that there is, because of how much like shame and guilt and sort of like trauma is around porn, not just from the people that have been in it, right? There's obviously like stories of people within the porn industry being abused, and people that are in the porn industry that are there because they are addicts and they have no other means, but also because of the user, right? The users are also, a lot of them are using it for reasons that are trauma-based, that are shame-based, that are kind of like some of the things that we've been discussing and talking about. It's like there wasn't an openness to the communication. So I think you wanted to say something else there.
Well, just to go down that route, I mean, you hear it all the time, sex work is real work, and it's a lucrative career choice. Yeah. But, as sexual norms ease up and people are accepting of everything now, like this is just, it's an accountant or a policeman or a porn star. It's totally fine.
How do you, I think there's a lot of stats that are coming out now. There's sort of like 30% of the internet is porn, like all the...
Only 30%?
Yeah, only 30, it's like 30 or 35% of the internet.
It was in the 90s.
Yeah, but it's like,
it's more like the water on the earth.
But like you look at sites like Pornhub, right? Like in 3 months, they managed to get 50 million users. It took Facebook and Apple and like all these other companies years, decades for some of them to get 50 million users, and Pornhub did it in like 3 months. And I think what we're starting to see is that more and more young boys especially are watching porn earlier. Like the average age is 8 to 11. Like being an 8-year-old boy or a 9-year-old boy watching porn, like, yeah, exactly, right? And being introduced to that, oftentimes by someone that's older, or because they're stumbling across it on YouTube or whatever it is, that, like, don't you think that has consequences? And how do we start to address that?
Yeah,
because that seems like a very real thing.
But like anything that's wrong with this world, like the internet is not to blame, and I feel awful about that, but everything, it starts and stops at home with parenting. If you talk to your children about these things, they won't have the desire to go down that route or be violent or be an alcoholic. I'm a former junkie, and my kids are aware of all the friends that I've lost. They know the consequences of drugs. The reason that I went down that road is because no one told me. So you address everything top to bottom, not just sex. You have to have open dialogue. Healthy communication is the key to a happy life.
They're interesting correlations though, right? Because it is amazing that like Burning Angel and kink are changing the face of what I guess you would call like sort of the mainstream top line porn stuff. But to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like we don't really have any data to know if like less people are being abused in the porn world. Like we know that there are like webcam farms basically that really take advantage of a lot of these girls. And like maybe it's not happening in the States as much as it used to, but like it is still happening. And like sex trafficking is a huge thing. And like what is the correlation between porn and sex trafficking? Like does one create a desire for the other? Like I don't know. I don't have the data on that.
I think a big problem is that we criminalize sex workers in this country.
Sure.
And so they're forced to go underground and put themselves in these bad situations. Like we need to be open and address that and stop criminalizing sex workers of any kind. It's an occupation. It should be a box checked on your taxes.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and there's no reason that people should end up in jail. And the people that they target tend to be trans and people of color.
Sure.
And next thing you know, they're being deported because they're arrested because of these heightened laws. Yeah. Or killed. It's criminal what is being done to that community in this country.
there is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, totally agree with you. I think on, just the rights of sex workers and figuring out the best way to allow them to do what they're doing and decriminalize is important. I think Visa Sosta was like something that really had a huge impact on just trafficking and what was happening. Because you're right, there would be people who kind of set up accounts, send videos out, and then it's escorting, and then it's like someone else is managing the account, and then it's sex trafficking.
Right.
Then you have these people kind of going through this experience. But yeah, decriminalizing is probably like the first step to really help with that. Like give them an option to not be criminals, but to truly be victims and to be able to say like, this is what's happening to me. Allow them to go to the police without fear of arrests and stuff like that. And I think you can prevent some of the sex trafficking thing. But on the porn studio side, like the larger studios are keeping it safe. I think there's a lot of smaller studios out there that do take advantage. And Rashida Jones had a great series called Hot Girls Wanted, which was all about how people kind of get stuck into trafficking and how they get caught up in it, when they're young and kind of leaving home and have no options. And $2,000 sounds great, and I'm gonna go to Florida, and then you're caught up. So I think more visibility on that and just making people more aware, but also just decriminalization. Like if we decriminalize sex work, then these people have a place to go. They have, support. They know that if they want to leave this, if they want to, escape the sex trafficking side of, the porn industry, they can. And I think that's really important.
And it's a lucrative business. My son wants to be a zoologist. The average income for a zoologist is $78,000. I would much rather him be a porn star.
I want to jump back in on
Straight
something you just said.
And then we're going to talk about your son's future porn.
Then we can talk about his career path.
His clear path to porn.
That I completely agree that decriminalization would be a really solid step, that educating parents on how to educate their kids would be a really solid step. I also know that the internet moves way faster than governments do, moves way faster than police, moves way faster than our culture can. So I guess the question that I'm really interested in, when I go and talk to young men, it's what are the things that either the internet can do or the industry or we as people who access the internet can do to start changing that conversation so that maybe the next generation can grow up in a world where there is a decriminalized profession known as sex work, right? And it's I think it's dope that you talk to your kids about using, but most parents aren't ready for that, right? And schools are talking to people about
pass
drinking.
An aptitude test for parenting.
They're not allowed to parent until you can have these conversations with a straight face.
There's a test you have to pass to buy a gun. There's a test you have to pass for a driver's license. These both are viewed as possible weapons.
Sure.
And you can cause someone to be a violent sex offender if you do not have an aptitude test in place to teach people that,
Sure.
hey,
So,
these are
what
some
is
basic
that?
things that you need to know.
Well,
Sterilization first. And then
I'm moving closer to this.
sterilize all people, make them take a class.
Just
Sterilize
a test,
them.
man, because there are a lot of people that should not be having
Seriously,
kids.
Oh, yeah.
we would
I
all
mean-
say that no one should drive drunk, right? And we have an entire cultural vocabulary for cocktails are great, enjoy them. Cigars are great, enjoy them. But we also have the same vocabulary that says drinking when you're a child is pretty dangerous. And drinking itself is really dangerous, whether you're 50 or 5.
Yeah, and
right?
there isn't unfettered access, right? I think the
Right.
different comparison is not everyone has pounds of cocaine in their home,
Sure.
or cabinets full of alcohol.
That you're giving
But
kids
in,
the keys
in pretty
to.
much
Yeah.
every single home in America, you can access whatever type of porn you want to watch.
Every pocket in
Right,
America.
largely,
Yeah.
right, and
Every
we can,
phone.
yeah, and most phones, and you can see a lot of teenagers are starting to get access, and parents don't really know how to block, and of course there is absolutely responsibility on the parents. I think the reality though is that there are far too many kids that are going to slip through that
Sure.
for whatever reason, whether it's religious, like we were talking about before, where the parents, don't have those conversations. That's I think religion's probably not just going to go away.
For sure, but you can't expect the internet to raise your kid.
Absolutely,
You,
absolutely
I mean,
not.
I think it is about public advocacy and really, PSAs, just like there's PSAs for alcohol and drugs
Tobacco,
and, all these other things, there needs to be PSAs for porn. There needs to be, some sort of education, some sort of message out there that just like lets kids know like this isn't real. These are actors. Like here are the conversations you need to have with your kids. Like your kid is 8 years old. Get ready. You know, like
Like a
prepare people.
stuntman, a disclaimer at the beginning of Jackass.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like disclaimers
Trained
are important.
professionals. This
trained
is not what real
professionals,
sex looks like unless
Yeah.
you like this type of
We're
sex.
heading- I mean,
in
there's
which case, go find
yeah.
it. Like, yeah.
Right now, there's a porn ban in the UK that's coming up in July. Basically, you need to have a credit card to access any sort of porn. All the sites are changing it. You need to be 18 plus to access any porn.
You have to
any
prove that
site.
you're 18.
You need
You have to
a
prove
credit
you have a
card.
credit card to prove that you're
Interesting.
18
Yes.
to access any porn. All the studios are freaking out. It's basically the entire UK blocking porn, in essence. And obviously, other countries like Turkey and places that are a little bit more religious completely block porn. There's no access to it. If you're found with porn on your computer, you can be arrested. So I think there is the idea of completely trying to eradicate porn, which isn't going to work. It's always going to be available, always be there. And I think the other side of it is like, well, let us accept that porn exists. Let us know, like, we know it's here. What are the conversations we have to have?
Yeah.
How are we talking to our children? How are we making sure that this isn't creating a worser generation than the one we had
Totally.
before? Because now they have access to even more stuff.
Well, and I think the more, like, I think what we can probably learn from our past as a society, as a culture, you know, as religious beings, is that the more you restrict, the more darkness you create, right? The more that you restrict people and you put them into these boxes and the more confines you have around them, the more that they are curious and try and find ways out of it. And it creates immense amount of shame that they end up acting out on.
I mean, yeah, you look at the Catholic Church and like the amount of pedophilia that's been taking place, like
Right.
is a pure example of it. The more you restrict, the more you prevent people from experiencing sex, which is natural, God-given, is joyous, and should be celebrated, the more that you have these darker categories and these
Yeah.
darker places that exist in people's minds and hearts.
So what would you say is the difference between healthy, we'll call it healthy usage, like normal usage, and when does it start to cross the line into an addiction?
I think it comes down to any addiction. It's like, when is it impacting your life in a negative way? Is it impacting your relationship with others? Is it impacting your job? Is it impacting your health? And you start looking at those things and say, is my porn addiction to the point where it is those things? And a lot of people do become addicted to porn, and they do spend a lot more time on that versus building actual relationships. And I think that's where addiction comes in. Once you're unable to build actual relationships, once you're unable to keep a job or maintain just normal, like, healthy life, like, that's when it's addiction.
Yeah.
I think watching a lot of porn or a good amount of porn and enjoying it, like, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's important to incorporate into your love life. It's incorporated to have your partner kind of on board for your porn habits and discover things that you enjoy together. But yeah, once it's like a negative impact on your life, you're heading into addiction zone.
Yeah.
Have you ever found yourself nearing that space?
No, I mean, I think younger, you kind of like just go through of all the excitement of seeing it, and then over time, like, I practice like mindful masturbation, so it's like a more meditative masturbation where I don't use porn. I like to more visualize, and that helps you with premature ejaculation. That helps you with maintaining erections and understanding the things that are triggering your deeper desires and sexual desires. I watch porn now like maybe once or twice a week, and we produce a lot of porn, so I watch that, but I don't find it as sexual.
It's work.
That's work. It's literally like I have to
the
watch
work
this
phone.
for work.
That's the work phone.
And also, actually, I do watch a lot of porn. Porn specifically for masturbation, maybe like once or twice a week. Porn for work, like pretty much every day. But
Yeah. I think a couple of really important things were just said in this space, which is like, number one, like, porn can be addictive. I mean, just about anything, right, can be addictive, but like...
Why do you feel like guys, because I hear there's like debate around that, right?
Sure.
Like, can porn be addictive? Some guys are like, that's fucking ridiculous. Like, why do you feel like there's a resistance around just labeling that porn can be addictive?
I think there's a resistance around addiction in general and mental health in general. I don't know if that's like a cause correlation, but anybody who tells me that porn can't be addictive, it's just like, read a book, bro. Like, come on. Like, the data is so there. And even like, let's remove pornography from the question and like just have a young mind, male, female, however they identify, in front of a blue computer screen for that long. Like, you're talking about overconsumption, right? And overconsumption breeds all sorts of health issues. And like, we know how the brain works. We know that.
I'm so sorry. The leather, it was not me. My apologies.
We know that our dopamine systems in our brain respond to things like anxiety, and they respond to looking for pleasure more than they respond to actually getting pleasure. Because if we responded to getting pleasure, we would just find a blueberry bush in the woods and then eat and stop looking for food, right?
No, but
So
you can
like,
be addicted to the blueberry bush. Anything
Sure.
is addictive.
Sure,
I am an
but I'm saying that
alcoholic,
porn
and
can be addictive, and that's something that a
and
lot
I'm
of
saying
people just
anything
don't.
can
Totally
be addictive.
right,
Like,
and that's how it started.
I stopped drinking, and I immediately, because I drank wine, and,
Yeah.
and it's got tons of sugar, so I started eating candy nonstop.
Totally.
Next thing, I was eating a gallon of ice cream a day, and I was like, I'm addicted to fucking ice cream. So I had to stop that, and then it was Swedish Fish, and I was like, I
had to separate
am
out
addicted
the
to
fucking
everything.
and the ice cream for a second, based on this conversation.
But porn is the one thing that I haven't been addicted to. And I am super
That's really
thankful
interesting.
for porn in my life. The first few years of my marriage were long distance. I lived in Los Angeles. My wife was in New Jersey. And we had that bond. Like, there was no FaceTime in 2000. And we would just watch porn, and that would be like, we'd be on the phone and talking and watching, all right, cue up this video, and you know, it's very healthy. And I'm about to be married for 16 years in July, and it's all thanks to porn, man.
Yeah.
I thank my marriage, the health of my marriage. I
That's
give it all
wild.
to porn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that anything can be, you're totally right. You could be addicted to the blueberry bush. But I think there is this whole culture where men don't even realize that they could be addicted to porn.
Well,
that it's a possibility.
What was your experience? Because you've talked about
Yeah.
having a porn addiction. So how did
So
that?
I talk
how did that
about it
come
a lot, and it's like, for one thing, I didn't know for years that I could be until I was sitting there reading an interview with Kanye West. And Kanye West was talking about being addicted to porn. I was like, fuck, like, I didn't know that was an option. I didn't know that that was a fucking category for humans to fall into. And I was like, oh shit, like, the light bulb just went off. It explained everything. I'm like, sidebar, if Kanye West is the person identifying your mental health issues, like, that's a whole other conversation, right? But yeah, my experience with porn was that, you know, as I said earlier, it was something that I started doing for research, and then very quickly was the way out of every uncomfortable situation. It was also the place that I went to reward myself for things that were great. It was the system. And, you know, a big misconception about addiction is that people think it's a place that you go to feel high. Really, it's a place you go to feel nothing, right? It's to get out of whatever situation you're in a very honest, generally an honest and loving attempt to just remove yourself from some component of your life. And that was very much my deal with, like, being bullied, feeling uncomfortable. And, you know, before I knew it, man, it was like, that was what I was after. Like, I'd be in class thinking about when I'm gonna go home. I'd be, you know, invited to a dinner or something, or like missing Mother's Day brunch because I was at home, like, still engaging with porn because of anxiety and things like that. And, you know, we know now that, like, porn is correlated with anxiety, depression, lack of energy, all these things, which 1,000,001 other things are also, like
Ice cream.
Ice cream, yeah, not sleeping enough.
You could eat a quart of ice cream
Twitter,
every day
not-
and
yeah.
produce similar effects.
got a problem with ice cream
Overconsumption
porn.
is associated with these things, right? So anything that you're over-consuming is gonna probably hurt you, right? It could be the blueberry bush, you know?
Living in moderation is so important, and I think
Right.
it's the same with porn. It's like you want to moderate that.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of, like, preventing other addictions, like, for me, it's I am a hypersexual person, so I'm, you know, always in a sense, like, excited about sex and looking for sex in some way. But I find that porn helps remove that. So if I'm ever feeling that way, I can watch porn, kind of get that out of my system, and continue going about my day, not thinking about that thing.
So it takes the edge off for you,
yeah,
as
it's
opposed to
definitely-
making you want more.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a completely different feeling, like, where I'll, like, talk to someone, like, oh yeah, let's meet up, and then I watch porn, I'm like, like, maybe not. Like, I don't need to spend time with you.
But do you think there comes a point where we can, like, mitigate that? There's a really great psychologist out of Vancouver. His name is Gabor Mate, and he's like an addiction specialist. And he says that addiction is addictions are there to solve problems.
Totally.
Right. So there's some inherent problem that we're trying to solve through that addictive behavior. And the majority of the time, it's some form of connection or disconnection that's happening that we're seeking to solve for, right? So you're talking about anxiety or social anxiety or depression. There's always something that we're looking for. So for maybe for you, Mike, what problem did you feel like you were trying to solve when you were like really deep into it? You listed off a few things, but
Yeah, I want to be real clear that I wasn't like present with that problem at the time. Like I know I can answer this question even maybe as vaguely as I'm about to, only because of years of work and like talking to hundreds and hundreds of addicts like across the world about their experience with pornography and like their experience with sex and love. I am a rare addict who like did not come from an abusive household, did not come from a repressive environment. It's like whatever happened in here just kind of fucking happened. And like I needed a way out. Like in retrospect, I was being bullied. I was deeply uncomfortable in my own skin, like huge self-esteem issues. Had no idea what I was gonna be doing with a girl. Thought, was totally unsure about like how I could make myself into more of a man. And I was in a really high pressure academic world also. And I think porn was just the only fucking place that I could control. I knew how to get what I want when I wanted it, and it was free.
yeah,
And it was in my pocket. And like I could be anywhere in the world with an internet or cell reception and get away.
yeah,
Right. And like it eventually started to creep up and went from being this place that like, I think at first for me, it was a lot like what you described, right? It was like, okay, now I can go back out into the world. But eventually it was like, an hour later I needed it again. Half an hour later I needed it again.
yeah.
And like I'm sitting there like trying to be a writer, sitting in front of my laptop, trying to write a book or something. And then the only thing I'm actually doing with my laptop is watching porn until 2 a.m.
Right.
Which again, we don't have to, this doesn't have to be porn. Substitute anything for that overconsumption.
But I think early, like with anything, early intervention is the key.
Totally.
And I think that kids should have therapy in school at the very least once a week. Not a therapist on site that they could go to. Mandatory therapy. You go in and you talk. My son is on the spectrum. He lives and breathes therapy. There was a point in his life where he was seeing various therapists 5 to 6 times a week. And I remember he was about 7 and we're on a playground and some kid was losing his shit. And my son just turns to me and he goes, man, he should really talk to his therapist about that. And I go,
How old was it?
he was 7.
I love it.
And I said, there's a chance, bud, that he doesn't have a therapist. And he looked at me in shock because he only knew therapy from age 3 on. And he's like, why? He couldn't grasp why. He's like, how does he survive without it? And he's more articulate with his emotions and feelings at age 9 than most 40-year-olds that I deal with.
Yeah.
Like his emotional language is exciting for me. Like I saw he had a face on and I was like, what's the matter with you? And he's like, I'm vexed. And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. And he's like, you must not know what the word means. And I was like, no, but no one uses the word vex. That's so great that you could tap into that precision.
Interesting.
And I just feel like if it was offered on a regular basis in school for kids to go and it became part of the culture where we're talking more, like we would be able to express ourselves and the issues that troubled you at a younger age, you could be working through them earlier on instead of coming to a tipping point where it's just like, fuck,
Yeah.
or me, fuck.
Yeah.
I was in therapy.
It was.
The whole time.
It just seems to like get into a dysfunctional space when we're not having those conversations. And I think a lot of it still comes from, like you said, I didn't come from this like a dysfunctional family or abusive home, like whatever.
Yeah.
But then you go on to talk about being bullied, Like that's still a form of trauma.
Absolutely.
I think we as guys, oftentimes we have this challenge around labeling what trauma actually is. It's like, look, if you were fucking picked on at school and people beat the shit out of you and put you in lockers and garbage cans, it's like, that's trauma. Like we need to stop dicking around and pretending like that's not trauma, right? You're like an 8-year-old kid and that happens to you, or a 12-year-old kid and that happens to you. It's like, that's traumatic.
Sure.
Period. And that leads to coping mechanisms later on in life. And I think that like these are the types of conversations that start to open up the door to move the shame aside, move the trauma aside, and not aside, but like actually heal through it. And those are the important pieces. So, you know, if you were to speak to your younger versions about porn, what would you want to say?
Ooh, what a great question. Fuck.
It's as fun as it looks.
It's as fun as it looks, that's for sure.
It's pretty accurate, yeah.
I think just knowing that they're professionals.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of people watch porn and expect like that's what's supposed to happen. Like this is the expected part, and you know it's why we've seen such an increase in the amount of people like coming on people's faces. You know, there's kind of like this idea that this is how it's supposed to be. And a lot of us, you know, growing up, use porn as a way to learn about sex. Like we all, like most men out there, want to be good at sex.
Yeah.
You know, they have that desire to please their
It's
partner.
like why they go to it.
Yeah,
first.
they go
Like,
to it
wanna
first. It's
win.
like I want to learn this. I want to know how to do this. I don't want to feel ashamed the first time I have sex and be told that I'm not good at it. So you go and you watch it, and you watch tons of it, and you see different things, and you know expect the orgasm to happen right away because that's how it is in porn, and you kind of expect it to end with you coming because that's what you see in porn, and it's kind of, you know, these expectations that we set for ourselves. So I think the first thing would be it's fantasy. You know, like I wish my younger self knew that it wasn't real. And I think also that these are professionals. Like this is their job to be hard for, you know, an hour at a time and like to be ready to go or to, you know, be in these positions and these things. And I think that was necessary to learn. There's actually just a recent story of a girl who now has to have a colonoscopy back for the rest of her life. Like she just kind of, because they watched some porn and tried doing what was in the porn and really didn't have the information that they needed to like do it right. And now, you know, she's unfortunately shitting in a bag for the rest of her life. Yeah. Like that's the type of things that are happening to youth out there as they are watching this and not being educated.
There's like education needs to happen.
Yeah, know that this isn't real.
And in all seriousness, to respect your partner. You know, like a lot of the porn that I saw at a young age was violent, and I grew up in a violent home. And you know, you don't want to take that into the bedroom. You don't want to think that this is how it works. And I think, you know, to address it like they are actors is clutch.
Yeah. Mike, what would you say?
Man, I've had such like a rough run with the world of internet porn. Like it was both like savior and whatever the fucking opposite of a savior is. Like the guy who drives
Sculptor.
You. Yeah, sculptor. Was that on camera? Was the sculptor joke on camera? Fuck, we better get that back.
That was a good callback, though.
You know, it's been such a peak and valley experience for me. And like, you know, I actually wasn't ever shoved into lockers, and I wasn't without mental health professionals all around me in school, weekly appointments, like friends and family. And I still found myself in a place where I was, who knows if what came first, you know, the chicken or the egg, with like severe depression, anxiety, things like that. But like, I wasn't making it better. And I certainly wasn't making my writing any better. So there's a lot that I would want to say to that 12-year-old. There's a lot, man. I think I would probably say, you know, it is as fun as it looks, you know, for sure. Like there are some really exciting, really great things that are gonna come out of this. But I'd probably really want him to know just how dangerous it is. I'd want him to have the same warnings that he got about booze. Like, go drink, like have a great time, celebrate with your buddies, but like don't drive on this shit. And like, don't think it's gonna solve everything. Don't think it's gonna make you cool. Don't think it like gets you in with the group of people that you wanna be in. Cause like, I got those warnings about drugs. Like nobody ever offered me free drugs. Like, you know, I've never been to those parties. But like, I mean, anytime I had a phone, anytime I had a computer, they were basically offering me free porn.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I would really want him to just know like, yeah, proceed with caution, my guy. Like, and if there's something you really want from a partner, like to go back, like, just ask. Like, it's gonna feel real weird and real awkward, but like, just ask. Like, because you're not gonna learn it out there. You're not gonna learn it out there.
I think
So.
if I was to answer the same question, like I often talk about this at men's weekends that we lead or like working with guys, and I always come back to the space of like, pause and ask yourself, why do I want to use this? Why do I actually want to watch porn? Because I think one of the interesting things is like when we talked about some of the stories of porn, for most of us, it was filling some sort of a void, right? It's like, I feel anxious about this flight, so I want to go and watch that and like masturbate, right? And I think when I started to ask myself that question years ago, I started to really tune into how I was feeling most of the time. And a huge part of it was like, I wanted to watch porn when I was lonely or when I was super stressed out and had so much going on at work, and that was like my release method. Or I wanted to watch porn because I was, depressed, or I was just like, or I wasn't getting enough. Like, it was very rarely that it was actually about being turned on and being horny. And most of the time it was like, I'm lacking some sort of connection, or I feel anxious or depressed about something, or I feel angry and I can't seem to solve this problem and I need a release. And the majority of the time it wasn't about the actual like eroticness of it. And I think that that's a shame, and because then it starts to take sex and intimacy and smash it together with anxiety and depression and dependency and shame and all of these other parts. And so I think when we start to ask ourselves these questions and we start to question these rules, we can start to separate what is that intimacy, what is that sex look like, what does that desire look like that I actually have, and how is that separate from shame or trauma or the anxiety and depression that might be there, and start to like have that healthy space. So listen, guys, you are amazing individuals, and this was such a great conversation. I feel like we could have sat here for half of the day and just told stories about this realm, and I feel like we got into pieces of it that were so wonderful. So thanks so much for being on the show. Thanks so much for what you're doing, for your insight and wisdom, and thanks for questioning the rules.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, give me a hug.
Hugging?
Chris, you have a hard ass.